Was the Renaissance really a rebirth or actually a rebrand? We're told it revived beauty, reason, and classical truth, but behind the domes and frescoes, something else was happening. Money lost its anchor in metal. Art became an instrument of obedience, and the most powerful family in Florence turned cultural glory into financial control. This is not a story about genius, it's a story about power, how it changed shape, learned to appear divine, and refused to step out of the spotlight. Once you see how money learned to wear meaning, you'll notice its echoes everywhere. From Medici, Florence to the cities we still mistake for miracles today. When the scales broke in post-Roman Europe, trust in coinage collapsed, barter surged, lords issued their own tokens, bishops too. A penny in one domain meant little in another. Debasement became the norm. A coin's worth depended less on its silver than on whose land you stood upon. Money reflected power, not metal. This was when money lost its anchor in measure and took flight into manipulation. By the High Middle Ages, coinage appeared stable. Kings, bishops, and chartered cities issued their own currencies. Each coin bore a seal that said, not this has value, but this value is commanded. Metal mattered less than authority. Currency became a form of authorship. Money was no longer a measure, it was a decree. Seigniorage, the profit from minting, became a major source of political income. Currency reforms did not reflect economic shifts. They managed war, succession, and fiscal need. Value was not discovered, it was declared. During this period, the definition of money began to fragment. A coin could store value. A bill of exchange could function as a medium of exchange. Prices could be listed in a unit of account that had no physical form. Money no longer needed to be a single thing. It became plural. It was a system of parts. These parts could relate to each other without being identical. The more flexible the system became, the more it could be bent by those who understood its levers. People did not accept abstract money right away. Trust was built through rituals. Public executions of counterfeiters, ceremonies for minting coins, religious blessings, and widespread visual propaganda. These acts kept the appearance of a unified system, even as money itself became fragmented. This matters because it reveals how power creates legitimacy, not only through force or wealth, but through repeated symbology and ceremonies, an early form of the carefully managed authority we see today. This fragmentation made money more abstract, more adaptable, and more subject to manipulation. It also made it more political. Those who could manage the distance between coin, paper, and account could extract value from the gaps. Nevertheless, this monetary abstraction was useful because it allowed the rulers and authorities to flexibly manage economic resources and political priorities, using money as a tool to assert control, finance wars, and navigate fiscal crises, while maintaining the appearance of legitimacy through symbolic rituals and institutions. At the same time, the church began to legitimize what it had long condemned. Usury remained a sin in theory. In practice, it was repackaged. Bankers used indirect contracts and future-dated transactions to charge interest without calling it interest. Papal dispensations granted to closely aligned banking houses permitted what canon law prohibited. So the church gradually reconciled lending with Christian doctrine, allowing debt to become a socially and spiritually acceptable tool of power. This was not an ethical shift, it was a structural one. Debt became compatible with salvation. Credit became compatible with power. What had been forbidden became foundational to the new system. A financial order had emerged in which loans carried both legal force and divine sanction. This redefinition gave money a new authority. It no longer had to be earned or minted, it could be authorized. The Medici are commonly remembered for their artistic patronage, yet perhaps they should more accurately be remembered for how they used art to entrench rule. Brunelleschi's dome, Botticelli's frescoes, Michelangelo's sculptures, all masterpieces, all politically directed. Though often attributed to Medici generosity, much of the funding came from public sources. Guilds were taxed, loans were imposed, Florentines paid, the Medici decided, as de Ruva makes clear in his book The Rise and Decline of the Medici Bank. These were not civic gifts, they were strategic displays. Cathedrals and palaces functioned as monuments to their authority. Public works became private propaganda. Each major building project reinforced their presence. Streets were redesigned to frame their image. The city's skyline became a political script with the Medici at the centre. This was not a cultural flowering of a republic, it was a visual regime. Renaissance art stirred admiration, and that was the point. The Medici did not commission beauty for beauty's sake, they engineered awe. Awe disarms dissent. Religious workers merged divine imagery with Medici lineage. Public works co-opted civic pride and redirected it to private power. Sacred spaces became family galleries, cathedrals doubling as dynastic billboards. In these visual economies, beauty had become obedience. Emotional saturation replaced political participation. If Florence felt like a miracle, no one would ask for who paid for it or who really profited. Machiavelli, writing in Florence during the same period, exposed the mechanics of rule that underpinned the Medici's cultural dominance. In The Prince, he argued that it is unnecessary for a prince to have all the good qualities, but it is very necessary to appear to have them. The Medici followed this principle closely, using art, religion, and civic ritual to project virtue while consolidating control. Public admiration was engineered, not earned. Their manipulation of religious authority and public finance echoed Machiavelli's view that appearances matter more than substance, and that power is preserved not through morality, but through perception. Humanism was a Renaissance movement that revived classical learning and placed human reason, dignity, and agency at the centre of education, ethics, and political life. The Medici combined financial power with cultural influence to reshape Florence and beyond. Their banking empire funded art and humanist scholarship that celebrated individual potential and secular authority. Humanism shifted ideas about ethics and governance, creating new frameworks for commerce, contracts, and the legitimacy of credit. Money and culture became intertwined tools of power, reinforcing each other. This blend of economic and intellectual forces helped construct narratives that masked exploitation and secured control over both wealth and society. Critics were defended by loyal citizens. The Medici were a testament to the effectiveness of cultural control. Humanism provided the language, imagery, and ethical foundations that supported capitalist accumulation, turning cultural ideas into mechanisms that legitimized power, shaped desire, and naturalized inequality. The church denounced usury, yet quietly relied on the very bankers it was supposed to oppose. This was not really hypocrisy, it was strategy. The papacy issued official statements against interest-bearing loans while granting special privileges to trusted banking houses such as the Bardi and Peruzzi that we've met previously. The Medici and Venetian firms such as Pizzari, the Canora, and others. These dispensations were not acts of mercy, they were instruments of control. By outsourcing its financial operations, the Vatican gained both deniability and liquidity. It collected tithes through Medici branches, financed the earlier Crusades and cathedral construction through credit, and relied on banking dynasties to stabilise internal politics. The Medici even supplied popes, 4 in total, enabling the Church's spiritual authority to be influenced by financial interests. In effect, the papacy benefited from the system it claimed to regulate. It gave sacred approval to debt while blessing the lenders. It condemned profit while drawing from it. The church's moral authority became intertwined with the credit mechanisms it once labelled corrupt. In doing so, it helped to create a world in which salvation could be financed and forgiveness could become a form of collateral. While they reshaped Florence, the Medici expanded their reach across Europe and beyond. Their financial networks stretched to Rome, France, Spain, and eventually across the Atlantic. They supported monarchs, influenced the papacy, and funded voyages that led to conquest. Credit financed these expeditions, which brought bullion and slaves back to Europe. The influx of wealth inflated currencies and debased their values, feeding new credit cycles. Cities like Lisbon, Seville, and Antwerp became hubs where imperial extraction and financial innovation reinforced each other. The gold and silver did not build ships, but fueled vast financial systems. Colonial plunder was transformed into capitalized power, masked by art, architecture, and credit. From Italy to the New World, the same principle held: seize control, make it appear magnificent, and use that splendor to maintain dominance. This relationship seemingly shows that the rise of European oligarchic capitalism was inseparable from violence abroad and liquidity at home, revealing the deep complicity of finance with systemic plunder and the often unclean nature of so-called innovation. Columbus's voyage was financed in part by the Medici's Seville branch, linking their capital to early imperial expansion. Columbus himself sailed under the banner of the Order of Christ, the Portuguese successor to the Knights Templar. His wife was connected to the order, further entwining the Templar legacy with his expedition. Now, as we saw in the last video in this series, such connections underscore how medieval networks and orders cloaked in secrecy and power appear to feed into the financial and imperial ambitions of Renaissance Europe. By the end of the 1500s, no one really remembered money as a unit of value. It no longer functioned like a yardstick, something fixed, shared, and trusted to measure worth. Instead, money became an instrument of abstraction, created by oligarchic consent, enforced through courts, and justified through cultural prestige. The coin was obsolete, the measure was gone. In its place stood a system where value was whatever power declared it to be, and that power wore the face of beauty. This was not a loss of innocence, it was the triumph of design. So while this video has placed much emphasis on the Medici, they were of course not alone. For across Europe, other financial dynasties such as the Fuggers in Augsburg, the Grimaldi in Genoa, and papal bankers in Rome built similar systems of influence. Venice relied on maritime credit. Antwerp transformed bills into empire. What emerged was not a Medici exception, but a structure, power financed through debt, legitimized through culture, and extended through conquest. The Renaissance claimed to revive classical ideals. In truth, it buried them. It replaced value with control. It replaced law with ledger. It replaced measurement with myth. The Medici were architects of a new order in which money no longer reflected worth, but imposed it. Their legacy is not genius, but domination, not light, but illusion. The Renaissance did not restore truth, it reshaped reality, and it taught power to wear a masterpiece. We now live among the aftershocks. The model remains. Look at the polished skyline of Shanghai or Dubai, glittering with steel and spectacle, each tower a monument to capital. Now look west, where civic decline is masked by abstract installations, dissonant forms, and state-sponsored confusion passed off as culture. In both cases, the formula holds. Redesign the skyline, reframe the narrative, redirect attention. Degrading art degrades public judgment. And when the public loses the ability to judge what is good, it also loses the ability to judge who should rule. What the Medici had mastered was not beauty, it was manipulation through beauty. Not culture, but choreography. That lesson was never forgotten. It was globalized. The coin no longer matters. The cathedral no longer needs God. The illusion is the value. and the city is still the theatre of obedience, and it taught power to wear a masterpiece. Thanks so much for joining me. Do check out the other videos in this playlist, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye bye.